Imagine walking into a room and hearing someone say, "Hello!" You turn around. Nobody's there. Then you realize it's a parrot. And somehow, this bird is making sounds that sound almost exactly like human speech. It can say your name. It can ask for food. It can laugh. Some parrots can even learn hundreds or thousands of words. So here's the bizarre question. How can a bird with a brain the size of a walnut do something that most animals can't? Why can parrots talk like humans? The answer is much stranger than simply saying they can imitate sounds. Because parrots aren't just copying noises, they're built for it. When you talk, air comes up from your lungs and passes through your vocal cords. Your vocal tract then shapes that sound. Your tongue, lips, teeth, and mouth constantly change the shape of the airflow. That's how you produce words. A parrot doesn't have lips. It doesn't have human vocal cords. And its tongue works very differently from ours. Instead, birds have something called a syrinx. It's essentially their version of a voice box, but it's incredibly sophisticated. The syrinx sits where the windpipe divides into the two airways leading to the lungs. That means a bird can control the two sides of its sound-producing system with remarkable precision. Some birds can even produce two sounds at once. And parrots have unusually powerful control over this system. But producing sounds isn't enough. The real mystery is how the brain controls them. Because parrots don't just make random noises. They listen, they remember, and then they reproduce what they heard. This ability is called vocal learning. And it's surprisingly rare in the animal kingdom. Humans are vocal learners. We hear sounds from other people. Our brains analyze them. We imitate them. And eventually, we develop our own vocabulary. Parrots can do something similar. So can some songbirds. And remarkably, some other animals, such as whales, dolphins, bats, and elephants, also show forms of vocal learning. But parrots are particularly impressive. Why? Because their brains contain specialized networks involved in learning and producing sounds. Scientists have found that parrots have neural circuits dedicated to vocal learning and vocal control. And those circuits are connected in unusual ways. Their brains are basically designed to listen to the sounds around them and modify their own vocalizations. Think about what that means. A baby parrot doesn't hatch knowing how to say hello. It has to learn. It listens to adults. It listens to its environment. It experiments with sounds. And gradually, it develops the vocalizations typical of its species. If you raise a parrot around humans, something fascinating happens. The bird may start treating human speech as part of its social environment. And this is where the story gets even stranger. Parrots are extremely social animals. In the wild, many species live in large groups. They fly together, they feed together, they communicate constantly, they make calls to locate one another, they warn each other about danger, they coordinate movements, and they maintain social relationships through sound. For a parrot, making noise isn't just entertainment, it's social life. So when a parrot hears humans talking constantly, it doesn't necessarily think, "I should imitate this because humans find it funny." Instead, the bird may be doing something much more natural. It's learning the sounds of its social group. Except, its social group happens to include humans. That's why parrots often learn the sounds they hear most frequently. A parrot might learn your name. It might learn the sound of the microwave. It might imitate a doorbell. It might copy a phone notification. It might even imitate a cough. Because to the bird, these are all sounds coming from its environment. And parrots are extraordinarily good at copying them. But here's the part that made scientists rethink what parrots are actually doing. Some parrots don't just imitate sounds. They can associate sounds with objects, actions, or situations. The most famous example is Irene Pepperberg's work with an African gray parrot named Alex. Alex became famous for demonstrating surprisingly sophisticated abilities. He learned labels for objects. He could distinguish colors. He could distinguish shapes. He could identify quantities. And he could use learned vocalizations in meaningful contexts. That doesn't mean Alex understood language exactly like a human child. He didn't. But his abilities demonstrated something important. A parrot's brain can connect sounds to concepts. And that changes the question completely. Maybe parrots aren't simply talking. Maybe they're using a learned communication system. Now imagine you're a parrot living in a human house. Every day, you hear the same words. Good morning. Hello. Come here. Want some food? Bye. Eventually, you discover that certain sounds reliably produce certain reactions. You say something. Your human responds. You repeat it. They respond again. Congratulations. You've just discovered that sounds can control social interactions. And parrots are extremely motivated by social interaction. That's why some parrots will repeat a word over and over until someone responds. They're not necessarily trying to annoy you, they're communicating. They've learned, this sound gets my human's attention, and attention is incredibly valuable to a social animal. This also explains something hilarious. Why do parrots sometimes learn completely useless phrases? Because parrots don't know what humans consider useful. If you laugh every time your parrot says something, the parrot notices. If you react dramatically, even better. The bird learns. That sound gets a reaction, so it repeats it. Until you start questioning every decision that led you to owning a parrot. But there's another incredible ability hiding underneath all of this. Memory. Parrots can remember sounds for extremely long periods. And they can reproduce them with impressive accuracy. Some individuals can build huge repertoires of sounds. Their brains are constantly storing information about their acoustic environment. That's useful in the wild, because a highly social bird needs to recognize individuals. It needs to know who is calling. It needs to distinguish familiar sounds from unfamiliar ones. It needs to coordinate with its group, and it needs to learn the communication patterns of other birds. So the ability to imitate sounds may have evolved because communication is incredibly important for social survival. Humans simply became one of the most interesting sound sources available. But here's something that makes parrots especially weird. They don't just copy sounds with their mouths. They can manipulate those sounds extremely precisely. Their tongues are muscular and highly mobile. Their beaks can shape airflow. Their syrinx can control sound production. Their brains can coordinate all of it. The result is a bird capable of producing sounds that our brains interpret as remarkably human. When a parrot says, hello, it isn't using human vocal anatomy. It's recreating the acoustic pattern using completely different biological equipment. It's like building a human voice with a completely different machine. And that's why a parrot can sound so convincing. But here's the biggest misconception. Parrots aren't secretly little humans trapped inside feathers. Their intelligence is different. They don't think exactly like we do. They don't have human language. They don't understand every sentence they repeat. And they certainly don't understand human conversations the way another person does. But that doesn't make their abilities less impressive. In fact, it makes them more impressive. Because evolution independently produced a system capable of sophisticated vocal learning in an animal whose body is completely different from ours. A human uses lungs, vocal cords, tongue, lips, and a sophisticated language processing brain. A parrot uses lungs, a syrinx, a beak, a tongue, and a completely different brain architecture. Different hardware. Similar result. And there's a fascinating evolutionary reason this happened. Parrots have been living in a world where social intelligence matters enormously. Their survival depends on relationships, finding mates, recognizing individuals, communicating danger, finding food, staying with the flock, learning from others. In that kind of environment, being good at learning sounds can be incredibly valuable. The smartest thing a parrot can do isn't necessarily invent a new sound. It's recognize which sounds matter and reproduce them at the right time. That's why your parrot might never say a single word in the wild that sounds like English. But put that same brain into a human household, and suddenly, hello, 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 you're looking at one of nature's strangest examples of convergent intelligence. Humans became incredible vocal learners because language became central to our survival. Parrots became incredible vocal learners because complex social communication became central to theirs. Different evolutionary paths, different brains, different bodies, but the same basic challenge. How do you learn what your social world is saying? And perhaps that's the most fascinating thing about a talking parrot. It isn't really showing us that birds can become human. It's showing us something much deeper. Intelligence doesn't have to look like us. A bird doesn't need lips to imitate a human voice. It doesn't need a human brain to learn sounds. And it doesn't need to be human to understand that making a particular sound can make another creature respond. So the next time a parrot says your name, don't think, it's just copying me. Because somewhere inside that tiny feathered brain is a remarkable system that has been listening, remembering, experimenting, and learning. It doesn't speak like a human because it became human. It speaks like a human because evolution gave it something almost as fascinating. A brain built to listen to the world and make the world answer back.